What a lifetime. It's really wild. Everything that's going on politically and, for those of you that don't know, we lost like a big member of the drag community this week on Monday. Heclina, who was an incredible queen out of San Francisco, who I'd worked with for quite a lot of years, passed away, and it was very surprising. She was only 55, and the drag community has just been kind of reeling because she was a legend. She was somebody who the infamous drag club in San Francisco, Oasis. She was one of the people who started that, her and another queen, Darcy Drollinger. And Heclina used to run, a long time ago, a show called Tea Shack, and it was originally called Tranny Shack, and she started it 30 years ago or something at this point, and, at that time, using that word was a reclamation for, a lot of folks in the drag community. It was used in a really different way, but, she was always, raunchy and irreverent, but she was also somebody that as soon as she understood that that was something that some folks in the community were feeling hurt by, she immediately changed the name. She was always I don't know, she was kind of curt and brash, in terms of her delivery. She was very dry, but she was also super warm and just really loving and thoughtful, and she created a lot of amazing community spaces. So yeah, it's a bummer she's gone, but it's also pretty amazing and inspiring how she lived her life, because she just never stopped. She never stopped moving on to the next thing, living she never got old in spirit, you know what I mean? And she wasn't. She was only 55, but even me at 40, sometimes I'm oh God, what's next? And she was always just doing the next thing. She retired. She bought a house in Palm Springs, but even after, it was because she wanted to do that. But even after that, she kept performing, and, she was amazing. So it's very sad that she's gone, but I actually flew down to San Francisco just for the night, and on Friday, just so that I could my drag mom, Varla Jean Merman, was performing a show at Oasis, which is the club that Heclina started with Darcy and some other folks, and it just I don't know, I hadn't, on Monday when we got the news that Heclina was gone, I was texting with Varla, and I was just oh my God, when am I going to see you again? And then it just was you know what? We got to do this stuff while we can. We never know what's going to happen. And so I just was I can clear my schedule on Friday. So I moved what I had on Friday, and I just flew down on Friday, saw the show Friday night, got to be at Oasis, in that amazing energy, see a lot of the community members down there. And then the next day I got to see Peaches, who had just come back from London, and I got to connect with her, which was amazing because, she was Heclina's best friend, and they had a really long and deep relationship. And so I'm really sending her a ton of love, and it was so good to get to just see her. And so yeah, it is also interesting that I don't know if it's interesting or not, but it's to me, it's meaningful somehow, the connection between losing Heclina and everything that's happening with these drag bans right now, and all of these various anti-LGBTQ plus bills. It feels as though a lot of what we can take away from Heclina's death, Heclina's life, and the fight we're having to have right now is all sort of revolving around the same themes, right? I mean, Heclina was somebody who was creating these safe spaces through drag and this celebratory stuff through drag before the Drag Race boom, right? Like before the internet connected all of us, right? It was a time when it really was sort of like word of mouth, and so I was living in Chicago and like starting to do drag in Chicago, but I hadn't really found my place as a drag queen there yet. And so I was hearing just like through friends of friends about Heclina and Peaches over on the West Coast and the parties that Heclina was throwing and the shows that Peaches was doing. And I was like, man, I got to get over there someday, And at that point, I had already seen Varla in Boston when I was like, a few years earlier, totally on a fluke. I just like happened upon her show and I was like, oh my God, this is life changing. And then finally made it out to San Francisco years later and, went to one of Heclina's nights and it was just like craziness and amazing performance. And it was like filthy too, and in a way that part of what's hard to me about these conversations right now that we're having about like drag and like its proximity to minors, right? Like it's so complicated and it's so impossibly hard to talk about, but because there's just so many aspects to this, right? Like all of this, I mean, not obviously to everyone. It's like I think those of us in the community see the connections fairly easily, but it's hard to explain all the connections in a concise way to people who are not necessarily quite as versed. Like, I don't think everyone understands how these laws around drag can impact the trans community in a very major way that is life-threatening. Like I've seen some people sort of being like, oh, y'all are being dramatic. It's not that big. But it is. And it's like, I'm going to try to continue talking about why that is and explaining it in a way that people can understand. But like, that's not what I'm here to do right now because I'm talking about other stuff. But because one of the things about Heclina was that she was like a pervert on stage. You know what I mean? Like she was her shows were like had like a lot of like really like raunchy material and it was great and it was celebratory. And at the same time, Heclina out of drag was a person who was great with like her family and with kids, and it's like both of those things could be true at once. And it's like hard that it's so complicated. I don't like the simplicity of drag is okay for kids versus kids should not be allowed around drag queens. Like it's not that simple. Adults do adult things all the time. It doesn't mean they're unsafe to be around kids, but we don't have to erase that aspect of them. I was talking to somebody who, like, I've been trying to think of examples, and somebody was talking about Eddie Murphy Raw versus Daddy Daycare, right? It's like we don't think because Eddie Murphy did Eddie Murphy Raw, our children can't see Daddy Daycare. It's like, it's so clear to people then, but for some reason, once we add queer into the mix, I mean, not for some reason, it's homophobia and transphobia. But, so, anyway, all that is to say, Heclina's shows were filthy. There were a lot of drag shows that were filthy. There still are. And there's something really important about that, because I think what people fail to understand that's important about that, and I've talked a lot about how this visibility was important and how, how important it is for young people to have an understanding that there's a queer community out there. But there's like also a piece of history that I think is sort of being glossed over or like misunderstood, right? Which is that I also went to like Sherry Vine's show on Thursday here in LA, and she's filthy, absolutely filthy. And it's like, it's important. You know what I mean? It's not just like people don't understand that part of this is that before Drag Race sort of like made drag into what it is now, and before everyone had access to all of this stuff, queer people, I mean, you know, you look at like Stonewall, right? There's a reason that the lineage of drag includes this. It's like in those days, queer people couldn't self-identify outside of those spaces. They had to like find those places they could hide, and even then they were under attack from like police raids and stuff like that. But, you know, at that time they couldn't self-identify and they couldn't openly identify with each other, right? So anything sexual in the outside world, outside of these spaces, had to be in secret. There was insane amounts of shame around it. And so when they went to a gay space and a drag queen sang an explicit song about like a sexual act, that wasn't for nothing. Those folks who were maybe felt deep shame about that act, maybe an act that they had performed that they felt forever that they had to like repress and they couldn't speak of, and probably didn't know if anyone else either did that or had common experience around it. And then in those spaces, if a drag queen sings a filthy song, that person can say, oh my God, I'm not alone in this, right? It's a way of like laughing about something that was so deeply shameful to this community. And it was just putting it out there, and it was putting it in the spotlight with sequins and sparkles and being celebrated. And so suddenly someone who like, you know, maybe was embarrassed about this thing, heard this drag queen singing about it, talking about it, making jokes, and was like, oh, I'm not alone in this. And not only am I not alone with this queen, but look at this crowd around me who is responding to this, who resonates with this, who shares this experience that I didn't know was shared. And so that's where the history of filthiness in drag comes from. It's because we were so sexually repressed outside of those spaces. It was an outlet that was not just like oh my God, we're all perverts and we have to like, you know what I mean? Like it was a bonding experience about the shame that the heterosexual community had put on us. So anytime that like, you know, the straight community or the conservative straight community is like, oh my God, drag queens are over-sexualized, they're filthy. Any way in which that's true comes directly out of your oppression and reclaiming it and connecting with each other about the deep shame that you have historically made this community feel. And so the filth has historical merit, right? And it's not all filthy. A lot of drag isn't as well. There's lots of drag that does not include that. And it's all true and it's all valid. There's stuff that is like made specifically for children, right? Like storybook book hours. But there's also just theater that's not made to be filthy, and it's not made for a kid. It's made because it's art, right? People make theater. They make movies. They make it because that's what they have to say. And then what they have to say will draw its audience. But like, I make theater. Sometimes there's entendre and like sex jokes in it. But that's not the heart of it. And that is true in lots of media. So if a parent wants to bring their kid to see one of my shows that are about community and loving each other and like self-respect and finding oneself, and they think that's more important than the dick jokes are bad, then like, great. That parent should decide that. Yeah. So, I guess I've already said this 20 billion times, but I can't quite find the most concise way to express that some drag is for children. Some drag is explicitly for adults who want to hear sexual or dirty content. And some drag is just art that exists in the middle and includes all of it. And all of that is valid and important. And I don't want to talk about how drag is filthy and so children shouldn't be around it. And I don't want to talk about how drag is appropriate for children and so the filthy part, I don't want to erase any of the range of this. So that's really hard to express. And again, there's so much other important conversation to be had around gender affirming healthcare and you know, the general attacks on the queer community and how drag like bills are kind of coded language that can lead to a lot of other things. And honestly, the relationship between like reproductive rights and Roe versus Wade, right? Like it's not a coincidence that we just saw all that happen and now this is all happening, right? Like it's not, they plan these attacks one after the other, after the other, after the other. We don't know what community's next. But they're weakening us, and they're changing public perception. And, not all these drag bills are going to go through, but there's more than 400 of them out there, and all they need is their strongest swimmer to make it to the Supreme Court. And then we see what happened with Roe versus Wade, where everybody is like, wait, what? How did that happen, right? We were also shocked when reproductive rights were like, were ruled against by the Supreme Court, and it became a national law of the land. But it happened over many, many years, and it happened exactly how this is happening. So if we, just one of those 400 plus bills has to make it all the way to the Supreme Court, and that's what can happen. And that's why this is important. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons this is important, but first it was people who can get pregnant. Now it's queer and trans people. It's also clearly been a lot of attacks on people of color, chipping away at the perception, the fact that, neither queer history nor, the history of people of color and the complications of how they've been represented, like critical race theory and all of that, like all of that's trying to be pushed out of how our children even learn about us. It's like, making us invisible, erasing our history and our culture. It sucks. So, I guess that's what I have to say about that for now. Thanks for listening. I mean, it's so much more complicated than that. There's so many, that part's not more complicated. It is what it is, but there's so many other angles, so many other things to talk about, which is why it's like impossible to feel like everything gets covered in any interview. It's like we just touched the tip of the iceberg. I'm trying to write an article right now, and I'm like, has to be under 600 words. I'm like, I could write 600 pages on everything, so I just got to pick the one thing. But I think right now what I need to talk about is what drag means to queer culture and how it is. It contains the history of our culture, and our history is erased in schools, and queer kids don't often have queer parents, so their parents don't have that history to pass down. So this art form is it. And even when we're not talking about the history of queerness, it holds that spirit, So anyway, I think that's what I'm going to write my essay about. But then I'm like, but I didn't talk about all the, other important things around trans healthcare and court systems and whatever. But you know what? I can only say one thing at a time in these interviews and in these articles. And this is what I have to say now, because Heclina really has me thinking about this, appreciating this. Heclina's passing is a tragedy, but it also, her legacy at this time, as tragic as it happened so young and at this time, her legacy is an important piece of what is happening. It is an important piece to understand the cultural merit of drag, the historical importance of drag, and of all sorts of drag. Oh, thanks. I'm glad you're looking forward to reading it. I don't know if it'll be any good. I feel like I can talk forever about this stuff, but when it comes time to actually condense it into something concise and written, it gets really hard. And you guys, I'm not even putting on makeup. What time is it? How long have I been doing this for? How long have I been doing this live? Can you tell? It doesn't tell me on there. It's 3 o'clock. I feel like I started this 20 years ago, and my beard isn't even covered. Uh, uh, but you know what? It's important to talk about these things, which I appreciate you just being there, being here, listening. I'm not asking many questions or interacting very much, but yeah, means a lot. All right. All right, I'm kind of trying to... Oh, thank you. You guys are saying very sweet things. Gus just told me I've been on here too long. Everybody tell Gus that this is important. But also he's waiting for me, so... All right, I get it. Okay, but he's right. I gotta go get in a drag because I have stuff to do. Because I get to live in this legacy. I get to be a part of this. That's something I'm very grateful for. I'm grateful to be a part of the community that exists now. I'm grateful to be linked to every drag queen who has ever existed. Because it's a tradition that's passed on. And I'm happy to be a link in that chain. Okay. All right, have a good day, you guys. Keep fighting and learning and listening and sharing. And see all of your loved ones as much as you can. Tell them you love them. Okay. Now comes the part where I can't figure out how to end it. Okay, bye.